From Relay, this is Connected, episode 543. Today's show is brought to you by Ecamm, NetSuite, and Google Gemini. I'm your annual chairman, Federico Vitici, and it's my pleasure to be joined this week as well by the one and only Stephen Hackett. Hello, Stephen.
Hello, Federico.
We just did I think, an interesting pre-show about me making a big life decision this year. So,
yeah.
Connected Pro members should go check that out and send me feedback about it, because it's as you'll hear, I think it's an exciting time for me. I'm sure I will get my fair share of critics, but I always do. But I think it's more exciting than concerning. So go check that out. We have some follow-up, Stephen, some really important follow-up.
We have some really important follow-up. I do have one little housekeeping thing I'm going to slip in here. There's currently work happening in my backyard, and I'm doing my best to mute, and Jim will do his best to clean it up. So if you hear background noise on my side, I apologize. It may not be to our normal standard of quality, but it cannot be helped. Okay, follow-up. Connor wrote in. When this came in, I immediately texted you a copy of this. So Connor wrote, on November 17th, 2023, that seems like a long time ago.
It is.
I sent feedback to the show about buying a Bridge keyboard from Best Buy. This was around the time that Bridge was, I think, going out of business, and then they got bought by like a new company with some of the old owners. I have some link in the show notes so you can follow Bridge's history. It was very complicated. Back to Connor. I'm here to report that 16 months later, the keyboard has imploded. The whole thing fell apart spectacularly in a 24-hour period. This led me to the realization that all iPad keyboards have significant compromises these days. So I bought an aftermarket smart keyboard folio. Fingers crossed it holds up. I'll check back in a year.
The keyboard has imploded?
What does that mean?
What does that mean? Like, it literally imploded on its... Like, I am so fascinated and sorry about whatever happened to Connor.
Mm-hmm.
This, like... From a podcast and entertainment perspective, sounds incredible. But at the same time, I'm sorry, Connor, that this happened.
Maybe let us know how it failed.
Yeah.
In putting these links together for the show notes, I also realized that Bridge is, there's some entities, companies, people, brands, whatever, who put Y's in their name for no reason.
Yes. Like, for example, what?
I mean... Nothing specific comes to mind. I just have a feeling that people have done it. It's kind of silly.
Feels like it feels like an early 2000s kind of vibe.
It does.
Yeah.
Like having a website without the last E in the name, or having I in front of your username.
Maybe you should actually consider rebranding Relay so that you don't use the Y, you use the letter I, so it becomes Relay I.
Relay I.
Because Relay I. So it's actually about AI. It's a podcast network about AI. That will end well for you, I'm sure.
I was telling somebody the other day, they were asking, just a person in my life, right? Not a tech person. They will never hear this. They're like, hey, what's the deal with AI? I was like,
oh boy.
Let's sit down. And I made the comment as, I know, I can tell what things are bubbly. Like, what's a bubble in tech, because that's what we get show pitches for. And so for a long time, Mike and I got pitches for like crypto stuff and NFTs. Sure. And now all we get is like, hey, have this AI person on your podcast, or start an AI podcast. And what I told them was, these things are bubbles to a degree, but there's always something that sticks around to the next cycle, right? Like, there's some crypto and NFT and like blockchain stuff that is still with us. And there will be some AI stuff with us in 10 years. The trick is knowing what's what. And I don't know how we're talking about this now. But anyways, Relay AI coming.
Relay AI.
Probably never, but maybe.
Yeah.
You never know. Christian wrote in. This is incredible. I'm a resident of the Channel Islands, where Sark is one of the 4 main islands. Sark or Cirque. I'm suddenly unprepared to say the name. This was on the flag in the Jeremys we played recently.
Yeah.
Fun fact, actually, it's 2 half islands. So there's a big island and a little island, and is one of the car-free islands in the English Channel. So there's no cars there, which is cool.
So Yeah, Big Cirque and Little Cirque. That's cool.
Yeah.
I wonder if Christian we don't know whether Christian lives on Big Cirque or Little Cirque and what the differences are between. Supposedly, I would imagine one is big and the other is small.
Yeah.
But yeah, interesting. Okay.
Yeah, Christian did not send in their address, if that's what you're asking.
Right. We don't want to dox Christian.
No.
For sure. Yeah. But thank you for the feedback.
I love hearing from listeners from like places we talk about or places I would.
We did a whole thing a few years ago. Do you remember?
We did. Yeah, we had people like just send in where they listen from, and it was a lot of fun.
Wild.
Maybe we should bring that back sometime.
Maybe without doxing people. Yes.
Well, I mean, the address there's not an address field on the feedback page.
If it's voluntary, is that doxing? No, probably
it's
not.
Just sharing.
So, yeah.
Last week, you asked to hear from people who are using high-end Mac hardware and like AI training, and like who's the 512 gigabytes of unified memory for? And Matthew wrote in. Matthew says, I have an M2 Ultra Mac Studio with 192 gigabytes of unified memory. I use it for research purposes at the university level, and I study exergy economics and perform societal exergy analysis using matrices.
Yes,
I had to look up a lot of those words.
Okay, exergy.
Exergy.
I got a lot of exergy myself.
Okay, exergy is defined, I asked the internet, it's the maximum amount of work that can be produced by a stream or system as it is brought into equilibrium with a reference environment. It can be thought of as a measure of usefulness or the quality of energy.
Okay.
I still don't know what it means, but that's how the internet answered.
It sounds fancy.
Yeah.
So, okay.
Look, I want to be in equilibrium with a reference environment.
I want to be in equilibrium with my environment as well.
When I think about that, I think about this like floating atop a pool, right? You're just like,
right.
You're just going with the flow.
Yeah.
Back to Matthew. This workflow is massively parallel. So I assign each country we're looking at to a processor core.
Oh, okay.
Even so, building a database of all countries, and there's a link in the show notes to this, it takes 24 hours for the Mac Studio to crunch the data. I wish I had funding for an M3 Ultra, but we will probably wait for an M5.
That is wild. Okay.
Isn't that cool?
You got that Italian core, that United States core, just humming along for the exergy. I love it. I also have my own example of a real life application of the Mac Studio. I recently spoke to a friend who's been hired as a video editor for one of the biggest Italian TV channels and one of the biggest televised talent shows here in Italy. And they were telling me that in the editing room that they have in the office, they have a whole lineup of about 10 M2 Max Mac Studios, and their policy is that they all have to use Final Cut, obviously. So they edit this really, really popular TV show with like millions of watchers on any given week, using just Mac Studios and Final Cut. And I thought that was pretty cool. Like they're obviously like they have different production pipelines for what's going on the online video distribution channels versus what's actually being televised over the air. Because this is Channel 5 is an over the air channel on television. So they have different encoding and production pipelines for what goes on the web versus what actually goes on TV, but they're all just using Mac Studios, M2 Max, and Final Cut. And I thought that was pretty cool.
That is really cool. I love hearing stories about people using Macs in these ways. Over the weekend, a friend of mine sent me a picture. I'm not sure where they were. It was some sort of like recyclers electronic kind of sell, right? Like it was a table full of old MacBook Airs, like pre-Retina MacBook Airs. And I just replied, I was like, MacBook Air rendering farm. Like, let's go.
Yeah.
Probably a bad idea. Hey, Federico.
Mm-hmm.
It's the final call for merch.
It's the final countdown, as they say.
You did exactly what I was hoping you would do. I was hoping you would.
Thank you. Of
You
course.
would call. Merch the sale ends on Friday, March 14th. Go to connectedmerch.co.uk. The link is in the show notes. You can't miss it. It's also the chapter art right now. Lots of ways to get to this. We got 6 shirts available for pre-order. Organic Mega Pickles, Tiny Head Special Edition, Take a Test Flight, Gumdrops, and Technology Should Be Colorful. Go check them out. We're trying to feed a baby here.
Exactly. And also, like, sure, the world may be ending, but wouldn't you want to watch that as it happens while wearing an Organic Mega Pickles t-shirt?
Mm-hmm.
Right? At least do it in style, you know?
That's a good point. I hadn't really thought about it that way, but
yeah, don't do it with a t-shirt with the Mac Pro on it. Like, do it with the Mega Pickle on it.
The Mega Pickle. I can tell you exclusively here that Mega Pickles is the highest selling shirt so far.
Ooh, okay. This is a big reveal on the show.
Followed by Technology Should Be Colorful.
Interesting. Don't give it away because we need to have a final proper reveal.
I mean, obviously, Tiny Heads is the best selling. I forgot. Tiny Heads selling.
Right. Despite Michael.
It's the middle of the pack.
Yes. Okay.
Now, if you combine I didn't do this. If you combine the 2 Tiny Head shirts, because there's Tiny Heads and Tiny Heads Special Edition, it's the top seller.
Okay. Ooh, okay. I like it.
So, go do it. Go check it out.
Yeah.
Seriously, everyone who's ordered one, thank you.
Thank you.
If you're in the Relay members Discord, which you can join by becoming a member of Connected Pro, I've been dropping free codes for t-shirts because with Cotton Bureau, as you sell more, you earn these free codes. And, I probably should send them to family and friends or like to you, but instead I'm just giving them away to members. So
that's a good call.
Yeah, it's fun. It's like have you ever like gone to a pond and like you drop bread or something and then all the fish like come up and eat it?
No, but one time when I was little, my grandpa took me to this really big square in Rome, and it was like, "Hey, do you want to feed the pigeons?" And he gave me a bag of rice, and I was like, "Just throw it on the ground, and the pigeons will come to you." And that has to be one of the most traumatizing events in my life, where I dropped these like rice beans on the ground, and I was basically assaulted by pigeons. and I was like 6 or 7, and I remember just being traumatized by it. It looked like a Alfred Hitchcock movie, honestly. Like I was basically assaulted by all these birds who just wanted to eat the rice. So I do think that dropping breadcrumbs in a pond is probably the safer bet.
Yeah. Or a code for a free t-shirt in Discord.
Yeah, for sure.
I could just see little young Federico there.
And I was real tiny, like I was short, I was real little, and all these pigeons flying toward me, trying to eat the rice off my hands. It was scary. Yeah. Anyway.
I'm glad you're okay. This episode of Connected is made possible by Ecamm Live, the leading video production and live streaming studio built for the Mac. Ecamm is great at simplifying your workflow because you can do it all in the Ecamm app. Get started quickly and have everything on hand to create whatever you need to with video. It's great for streaming, recording, podcasting, and presenting. If you want to stand out from the crowd, you need high-quality video, and Ecamm delivers. With Ecamm, you can screen share, use multiple cameras, and direct the show in real time with their live camera switcher. Plus, you can add logos, titles, lower thirds, and graphics, drop in video clips, bring on interview guests, use a green screen, and so much more. Ecamm Live truly does it all. And my favorite feature is that the UI makes it easy to manage all of these things. Doing video stuff can be really complicated when you have a bunch of sources, and Ecamm has thought about it. They've made it easy to use for a Mac user because it is built as a native Mac application, which I love, of course. Ecamm's members are entrepreneurs, marketing professionals, podcasters, educators, musicians, church leaders, bloggers, and content creators of all kinds. And if you're on the pro level plan, you can enjoy Ecamm for Zoom. Get this, you can automatically send Ecamm Live's audio and video output into a Zoom meeting, webinar, or event, and add up to 8 Zoom participants as camera sources in your broadcast or recording. Plus, you can automatically create individual participant audio and video recordings and add Zoom chat messages to your broadcast or recording as text overlays. Get 1 month free by visiting eCam.com/connected and use the code CONNECTED. That's 1 month free of eCam Live at eCam, ECAMM, eCam.com/connected with the code CONNECTED at checkout. Go there now and check it out. Our thanks to eCam for their support of the show and all of Relay.
Stephen, I have some important news to share with you and our listeners. I have finally found a really good use case for my $3,500 face computer, which will be the Vision Pro. It took me a year to get to this point, but I finally found a way for the Vision Pro to be sticky in my quote-unquote workflow in a way that I've been using it almost every night. That gives it away. Every night for the past week. So the Vision Pro has become my night computer. Not in the sense that, like, you know, the old joke of like day phone and night phone. It's not about that. It's about something else. So over the past few months, my girlfriend Sylvia, she's become very sensitive to light sources at night. I don't know what happened. I think, you know, maybe these things come and go during the year. You know, maybe, you know, there's the time of year when you're working a lot and you're particularly stressed. And so you're more of a light sleeper than normal. But over the past few months, yes, she's been very busy and she's been very stressed, you know, for a lot of responsibilities at work. But the thing is, she's become very sensitive to light. So we had to rethink all of our like home automations for like the colorful light bulbs that we have, like instead of turning off, you know, at some point in the night, they turn off before we go to sleep, or like even things like turning off the LED for my television or the LED for like my monitor in the office that was blinking by itself at night, like turning off all of these lights. And obviously I was the one remaining problem in this scenario, in that Sylvia goes to bed before I do, because I like to carve out like an hour and a half for myself to do my reading or to do my gaming, to do those sorts of things, you know, watch some YouTube videos, watch Severance, which Sylvia doesn't do. Like, I just want to have like those 90 minutes for myself before I also go to sleep. And obviously, I was waking her up constantly by using either my iPhone or my iPad Pro in bed. And so that's when I realized, wait, I could still use all the apps that I want to use without emitting any light whatsoever by using the Vision Pro. And so that's exactly what I've been doing for the past week. I've been using the Vision Pro as my night computer, mostly to do reading and watching TV, and obviously not playing games. Although I do hope that changes at some point later this year if Apple allows HDMI connections via the developer strap. We'll talk about that if it happens in visionOS 3. But I mostly use it to watch TV, watch YouTube, listen to some music occasionally, and catch up on my reading queue, just using the Vision Pro. And that gave me not just, obviously a newfound appreciation for, you know, finally I can put this really expensive computer to good use.
Yeah.
But also I have some up-to-date notes about using the Vision Pro regularly again.
Okay. I do have one hardware question.
Sure.
At some point, weren't you a person who like took off the light shield?
I did, but because of this new scenario in my life, I put on the light seal again.
That's what I thought. Okay.
Yeah, just to make sure that no light is bleeding whatsoever. In fact, I gotta look into whether I can actually turn off completely eyesight, you know, the outer facing display.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if there's a way to just say, just never light up the outer facing display. I gotta look into it. I'm not sure if there's a, maybe these things, like usually these things are like accessibility settings. Maybe there's an accessibility setting in somewhere to do that. But yes, I have the light seal again.
Just get some tape. Just tape over the outside of it.
Did you see that trypophobia-inducing cover for the Vision Pro?
Yeah.
That D brand, I think, made? It honestly looks horrific. But yeah, it doesn't completely block the display anyway, because you need the sensors. Anyway, so I'm running the Vision OS 2.4 beta. I have 3 comments. The first one is that the performance of the Vision Pro in really low light, and by low light I mean absence of light, because I'm using it in the complete darkness of my bedroom while my partner is sleeping next to me, the performance in low light continues to be really, really abysmal, really bad. Like the obviously the pass-through is non-existent at that point, but I always get the alert that I'm using the Vision Pro in low light, and I wish there was a way for me to say, yes, I know that I'm using this in the dark. Like I don't need you to tell me every single time. But the effect of you looking around a dark room is really jarring, because you get this, like, you don't get this pure pitch black. You get the pass-through version of pitch black, which is like black but fuzzy.
It's like in the old days when the TV channel went off the air and it was like dark static.
Yes, it's basically the equivalent of dark static. Obviously, using an environment mitigates that. But still, I wish there was a way for, like, I wish there was a dark room mode or something to just say, yes, I know that I'm using the Vision Pro in a dark room. And the good news, though, is that gestures still work perfectly. So the Vision Pro is obviously, I think it's using a combination of like LiDAR and something else to still see your hands and your fingers as you perform the pinching and the clicking gestures. So those work perfectly. But I wish there was a way to have a better darkroom environment. But speaking of environments, like the proper Vision OS environments, my absolute favorite is the new Bora Bora environment. Like it's so peaceful and quiet. It looks fantastic, but I continue to be very much confused by the volume and audio settings for environments in Vision OS. It seems that by default, the environment always plays sounds unless you go into settings and turn down the volume for all environments. But just like any other Apple platform, this applies to the iPad, this applies to the iPhone. I wish there were more fine-grained audio controls. Like, I wish there was a more, and I don't know exactly how, because I'm not an Apple designer, but I wish there was an easier way for me to say, just turn down the volume in this environment if I'm using it at night, or maybe turn it back up if I'm using it during the day, or maybe have separate. I think one of the things that Android, for example, does so well is having multiple volume sliders for different things. That sort of interaction does not exist on Vision OS. And I figure because it doesn't exist on iPadOS or iOS either. So that's, better and more fine-tuned audio controls would be nice to have.
Yeah, Android, just for people who aren't familiar, I just looked it up. They have volume levels for media,
Yep.
call, so like the volume of the other person on a phone call, ringtone, notification, and alarms, all separate sliders.
Yeah, and when you use the slider on Android, like there's like an ellipsis button that you can press, and when you press that button right underneath the volume slider, it brings up this menu with all the separate sliders that you can use. I think it's really well done. It's one of the best aspects of Android, and I think it's totally something that Apple should copy on all platforms. The final comment that I will share is that and this is again something that we spoke about in the Pro Show, but to overcome the lack of native apps on Vision OS, which is the same problem as iPadOS, I'm also using a bunch of web apps on the Vision Pro, and it's fine, really. It's actually better. This is one of the points that I will share in my article. It's actually better than on the iPad, because at the very least you can open an unlimited number of windows around you for those web apps. This is, part of the superior multitasking that you have on Vision OS compared to Stage Manager on iPadOS. I've been using this app literally called Web Apps from the Vision OS App Store. And Web Apps basically gives you a launcher, a customizable launcher for different websites. And each of those websites you can choose to open in a separate window. So I can have my Todoist, I can have my ChatGPT or Claude window, I can have my Google Calendar, all open as standalone web views on the Vision Pro. And I can, if maybe like one of the things that I also do like is preparing for the next day before I go to sleep. So I like to have my calendar, my task manager, some AI tool on the side, and I can open an unlimited number of these windows. And even though they are web apps, they work just fine. And even without a keyboard, I've mostly been using eye tracking and hand gestures, and they work okay. And the final thing that as an additional comment that I will share with you, Stephen, this will probably be a post on Mac Stories at some point. I was wondering last night, in fact, is it possible on the Vision Pro with the M2 chip to run AI models locally? And boy, was that fun. So I found these two apps from the Vision OS App Store. One is called Full Moon. It's made by a company called Mainframe. They do a bunch of AI services, I think. And they have this very simple client to run on-device private AI models. And they have those lightweight AI models, like the small version of Llama by Meta, a small version of DeepSeek, these small AI models that you can download, and they take up like 1 to 2 or 3 gigabytes. And those models, they work. They're kind of slow. I could hear the fan of the Vision Pro going off as I was chatting with those models locally, but the Full Moon app was working and got the job done. Then I found something else. I think it's called On-Device AI. Not the best name, but they have a Vision OS version that, funnily enough, and this is something that at some point I would like to check out. I think this app can connect locally on your Wi-Fi network to the Mac version to sort of offload some computing to the Mac version, which is an interesting idea that I want to check out. But this app also lets you download on-device models on the Vision Pro, but even bigger models. And when I saw that I could download the 10 gigabyte version of DeepSeek with 14 billion parameters, I was like, oh boy, I wonder what happens here if I download this huge model on the Vision Pro with the M2, what's going to happen? And here's my advice for whoever wants to try this. Don't do it. So my Vision Pro got really hot. So I downloaded the 10 gigabyte DeepSeek model. The Vision Pro got really hot. The fans, they started really going. And as soon as I loaded the model, everything crashed.
Oh no.
Bora Bora turned into a pitch black environment.
Well, that solves your pass-through issue.
Sure. That was actually that was a proper pitch black PNG probably just being used as a placeholder because the Vision Pro ran out of RAM, supposedly. The environment crashed. All of my other windows except the on-device AI window, all of the other windows, they sort of froze, crashed, and then got stuck in this like zoomed state. Like literally their UIs got stuck on screen. I couldn't move them. I couldn't close them, but all the UI elements were zoomed in. So they were like comically huge for whatever reason. It's like when you hit Command Plus in a web browser and you make the text really huge. That's what happened. I had to force quit all my apps. That didn't do it. I had to power cycle my Vision Pro. So if you try and run an AI model locally on the Vision Pro, maybe try with the small ones. Don't do the 10 gigabyte, anything over 7 billion parameters. Don't do it unless you want to have a really bad Vision OS crash.
That's incredible. I have never heard of a Vision Pro crashing out like that.
Yeah, it was kind of spectacular in its own way.
This episode of Connected is brought to you by NetSuite. Nobody knows for sure what the future holds for business. If you ask 9 experts, you're going to get 10 different answers. Some say rates will rise or fall, and others might say inflation is up or down. The only way business owners can know for sure is if someone invents a crystal ball. Until then, over 40,000 businesses have future-proofed their companies with NetSuite by Oracle, the #1 cloud ERP that brings accounting, financial management, inventory, HR, and more into one fluid platform. With one unified business management suite, there's one source of truth, giving you the visibility and control you need to make quick decisions. With real-time insights and forecasting, you're peering into the future with actionable data. And when you're closing the books in days, not weeks, you're spending less time looking backward and more time on what's next. Having your data in a place where you can readily and quickly access it, get the information you need, make decisions not on gut, but on actual real data, it's huge as a business owner. So whether you're a company earning millions or even hundreds of millions, NetSuite helps you respond to immediate challenges and seize your biggest opportunities. Speaking of opportunity, download the CFO's Guide to AI and Machine Learning at netsuite.com/connected. The guide is free to you at NetSuite, NetSuite, netsuite.com/connected. Federico, I want you to cast your mind back, okay? What was the phrase earlier? You want to, be brought into equilibrium with a reference environment.
Okay. So you want to channel all my exergy here.
I do.
Okay.
Yes. Do you remember iOS 6 to iOS 7? Do you remember that year?
Oh, yes, I do.
What a time.
What a time.
We could be getting ready to relive that. So Mark Gurman at Bloomberg and others have talked about a potentially, I'm quoting, one of the most dramatic software overhauls, unquote, in Apple's history. Gurman goes on to say, quote, "This will go well beyond a new design language and aesthetic tweaks," unquote. This would include the Mac and iOS and iPadOS. And it seems like the new design will be loosely based on Vision OS, with Apple's goal to make the design of its operating systems, quote, more consistent. Apple wants to simplify the way users navigate and control their devices. What is your gut reaction to this? Is this something that is needed?
So my first reaction was that, and I've been sort of banging this drum for the past few years, I really didn't think that we would see another major redesign after the whole mess that iOS 7 was. And it took Apple many, many years of refinement and sort of building back up the iOS design architecture to land in a more nuanced and stable place. And for that reason, for the past few years, I've had that line in my annual iOS reviews where I thought, under Tim Cook's Apple, we'll probably never see another major dramatic redesign again. And so I was very surprised to see this report by Gurman. But then, the more I thought about it, and the more I saw myself potentially going down two different paths with that thought. A cynical one and maybe a realistic one. And the cynical point of view is kind of where I want to start this conversation with you. Because the cynical point of view would say, well, if you are behind on AI, and the narrative surrounding Apple these days in any major tech press outlet is Apple is behind on AI, Google is eating their lunch with Gemini, and all these other AI providers are showing a different path for the future of technology. What's a good way to sort of change the conversation, almost Don Draper style?
Yeah, I was going to say Don Draper.
Yeah, that would be totally blindside the press and be like, well, I know that you're all thinking about AI, but what about a complete makeover of all of our platforms? So that's one way to look at it, Well, I think I think MG Siegler had a really good post about this on his new blog, Spyglass, this morning. Like, people are inherently and intrinsically almost always attracted to new. There's also another Mad Men reference. What a show that was when Don Draper explains the concept of new. This new creates an itch in people, and it's hard to let go of being curious about what's new. And so a new design, it sort of catches people's attention and maybe distracts them from all the problems that Apple is having with AI and Apple Intelligence. So that's one way to look at it. And I kind of wanted to ask you if you also think there's something to this idea.
I think that let me rephrase that. I don't think Apple says, hey, y'all, they get a big meeting. Tim Cook
Hey,
sits
y'all.
down. Hey, y'all, we're behind Apple Intelligence. Let's distract everybody with a new design.
Yeah.
Now, if that's an unintentional consequence, is Apple sad about that? Probably not. Probably not. I don't think Apple is a company that would redesign its OSs to calm
Out of spite almost.
Yeah, well, out of spite, but it's also kind of out of fear, right? Or out of a desire to distract from their ongoing woes with Apple Intelligence. And the whole Siri news cycle we kind of missed, but like personalized Siri not coming anytime soon, it seems like. And so I don't know. I don't think it's a distraction move, but I generally have been in agreement with you. There's like Apple is not going to really do a ground up rebuild, especially of iOS, because iOS 7 was so jarring. And for years, right? People like you and I both heard this in our everyday lives, like, oh, is my phone going to change if I upgrade it again? Right? People had to relearn things with iOS 7. It was very jarring. But if you look at iOS 7 and you look at iOS 18, we're in 18, right? iOS 18.
Yeah.
They are clearly different, right? Apple has evolved it over time. And yes, like the basic structure of iOS 7 is still more or less there, but it looks in some places radically different. And I think better than iOS 7 did. And so I've been on the same train you've been on of like Apple's just going to continue to evolve things over time. Some years we'll get bigger things than others. Like Big Sur was a pretty big change to Mac OS. The new control center being editable in iOS 18, like that's a big deal. Widgets are a big deal. But I didn't really think that we would have a big shift again, like this potentially could be. That said, I'm extremely interested in this. And I think the overall vibe of Vision OS, like the bronze and the frosted glass and the depth, I really like the look of Vision OS. And if there are things that can be gleaned from that, but done in an appropriate way for each platform, then I think that's okay. Like the thing that I really raised my eyebrow at, and like with Gurman, it's hard to tell like what's him and what's sources, but Gurman said, Apple also plans, quote, to simplify the way users navigate and control their devices. That worries me a little bit because where Apple has done that on the Mac, like they've hidden a lot of things on the Mac behind clicks or behind drop downs, and not all that's good. And I think Apple, in its current design iterations of software, wants to stash things away and you have to go find them. And I don't think that's a good trend. I don't think that's I hope that that's not something that is going to be like a hallmark of this upcoming design refresh. But as long as they don't go too far and they can take things from Vision OS and try to make things feel more related, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I don't know. Am I overreading that line?
No, I don't think you are. And that sort of brings me to the sort of what I've been thinking as the second way to consider this possibility, which is, so let's say that you're Apple and you're thinking about the future and you're thinking about what does your ecosystem look like, say 5 years from now or 7 years from now, where in addition to the phone and the tablet and the laptops, maybe you have glasses, maybe you have foldables, both on the phone and maybe foldable laptops or foldable tablets, and you have an app ecosystem that is going to continue, because this is already happening, but it's only going to continue becoming more and more modular, in the sense of like an app that you use can be a widget, can be, and I mean, you literally know with Widgetsmith, like what even is an app anymore at this point? It's not necessarily the icon that you press on your home screen, right? So if you're thinking about that, and you're thinking, well, let's say that we're doing a foldable phone next year. What is a window? What is an application window when you open up a foldable phone and it becomes a small tablet?
Yeah. What does that mean in a world where, I don't remember what podcast this was on, so my apologies, but some show I was listening to recently was talking about iPhone apps on the iPad. Like they're still just centered with background. I was like, why aren't those in slide over? Or like there are all these weird edge cases, and boy, foldables really complicate all that. And I'm not sure that iOS is, okay, here you go. As an iPad user, I'm going to ask you this. iOS apps started life as like, they take up the whole screen, right? There's no window Chrome. There's no window management. You open an app, you hit the home button on your iPhone in 2008 or whatever. I'm not sure iOS or iPadOS has ever really broken free of that. Like Stage Manager tries, but it's still on rails, right? You don't have complete free form control like you do on the Mac. And maybe, we're pure speculation territory now, but like maybe this redesign, like maybe that's part of this. Of like, what, on the iPad, turns out we maybe do need some window Chrome. And it needs to be more than like that weird little half circle thing in the bottom corner. And, visionOS had to deal with that because your apps are in your space, like in your physical space. And so there needed to be depth and some window management. And like, maybe the iPad benefits the most from this, which would certainly be interesting given our pro topic today, where the iPad feels really stagnant.
Exactly. And this is sort of where I was going. Like, I think another way to think about this rumor is, if you're Apple and you invested a lot of money, a lot of time, a lot of resources, a lot of people over the past few years into building the Vision Pro, and the Vision Pro with Vision OS, right? And the reception of the Vision Pro has largely been great software, but this hardware is not going anywhere, not with this form factor, not with this price, but the software is really good. That's been like a common theme over the past year. And so if you're Apple and you're looking at it, and maybe there's a part of you that thinks, well, should we throw away all of these interesting ideas that we've had for window Chrome and multitasking and interactions? Or is there a scenario, is there a timeline in which we can take some of those lessons, some of those design sensibilities, some of those interaction patterns that we have pioneered with Vision OS? Do they make sense on other platforms? And I'm going to give you like a very practical example. One simple way that I could see when Gurman says like this loosely word from Gurman's reporting is doing a lot of work in this context. But let's take it at face value. Let's say that you're loosely based on Vision OS. In a very practical term, that could mean that maybe, the home indicator at the bottom of your iPhone apps, like the home indicator that you swipe to open multitasking and to go back to the home screen. On Vision OS, you also have that sort of indicator anchored at the bottom of a window, right?
Right.
But next to that indicator, there's always a close button, so that when you look at it, there's a tiny dot next to the thin line. There's a dot that appears, and that's your close button. Maybe we could see something like that on iOS or iPadOS. There's maybe space to have more UI elements next to the home indicator. That could be something to close an app, or maybe it could be a window switcher. Like, again, in the context of a foldable, I wouldn't be surprised, for example, if this year at WWDC, we get an API, developers get an API to support multi-window on iPhone. And everybody's like, why would you want to do multiple app windows on iPhone? That's the sort of thing that sort of telegraphs the ability to have multiple windows on a foldable phone next year, right? And this is exactly what Apple does.
Do you remember when they did that years ago?
Size classes.
Classes. Like, why do you need, why isn't an app always the same size? Like, they're bigger phones coming. They're coming real soon. you know?
Exactly. Or like maybe when Gurman says they want to simplify the way users navigate and control their devices. All right, what does that mean? Maybe a way that, maybe something like that could be a redesign of tab bars. Like tab bars have been with us forever, especially on the iPhone. On the Vision Pro, they look completely different.
Yeah.
They're floating. Sometimes they're floating at the bottom. Sometimes they're floating at the top. Sometimes they are ornaments on the side. And when you look at them, they expand into different sections of an app that you can navigate. Maybe we could be looking at something that is not necessarily like a straight up one-to-one copy of Vision OS, but something similar to that, like a new way to navigate sections of Instagram, for example, or sections of, I don't know, Mastodon or whatever. And of course, there's the whole aesthetic, like the simplistic fact that you, for example, as Apple, have a chance to make your icons look completely new with new guidelines. Maybe you can give them a round shape. Maybe you can give them a sense of depth, like on Vision OS. I do think that the Vision OS app icons are some of the best work that Apple has done in years. And I would love to have some consistency with those style of icons. They're not skeuomorphic, but they're not flat either.
Mm-hmm.
They're new, they're fresh, they look nice. And I think that's potentially another avenue. But for me, the main point here is this idea of consistency. And I see a lot of people sort of arguing about this, like, does Apple need to make everything consistent, right? And that, I think, is where is the trickiest part of the conversation. Because obviously the Mac, the iPhone, the Vision Pro, the Apple Watch, like they're all fundamentally different platforms, right? With wildly different interaction systems. Some things have a trackpad, the phone you touch, the Apple Watch is tiny and on your wrist. Like they are completely different devices. Why? And do they need to look the same, right? And this is my theory, I would be personally shocked if Apple throws away decades, literally decades, of design expertise and design studies that show that it's better to optimize the same interface element for different computing platforms, and instead they just go, you know what? A menu should look like a menu everywhere. We don't care if it's on your wrist, if it's on your physical space with the Vision Pro, or if it's on a Mac, they should always look the same. They could do that. I would be very surprised. And for example, there's going to be a link in the show notes to show you a practical example of what I mean. On every Apple platform, there's a UI element called a sheet.
Mm-hmm.
You've seen sheets before. They are this. Sometimes they slide up from the bottom. Sometimes they come up in the middle of the screen. Sometimes they are full screen. It's technically speaking the same UI element, but as per Apple's human interface guidelines, they look completely different based on the Apple computer that you're using. And I think when Gurman says loosely, I think loosely potentially means that Apple is going to reuse, recycle, but always adapt some of the UI conventions and styles and sense of aesthetic that they pioneered with Vision OS, but they're always going to adapt and optimize that for whatever computer you're going to use.
Yeah, I think Apple knows that making the Mac and the Apple Watch and the Vision Pro all look and work the same are like two different things, right? You can recycle some of the visuals, but as you said perfectly, the interactions are totally different. And I think the best example of this currently, and stay with me here, is Vision OS and tvOS. The tvOS launcher and like that interface, like there's some Vision OS stuff in there, right? The icons kind of shimmer and there's some depth to them.
Yeah.
But one, you're using your eyeballs and your fingers, and the other, you're using a remote. And like very clearly those OSs are related, but you use them in very different ways. And I think Apple is definitely smart enough to know that copying and pasting one OS over another is not the way to do this. But, you know, there are some things that I think could be a bit more tidy across the line. And I think most interestingly, the iPad has the most to gain. And honestly, I think the Mac has the most to lose. Like simplifying window management on the Mac. Like we've had red, yellow, and green controls in the upper left-hand corner since the Mac OS 10 betas 25 years ago. But you hover over that green button and that thing is overloaded. You have move and resize, fill and arrange, full screen, and move to your other displays, all under a hover state. Like, okay, red, yellow, green still makes a lot of sense, but all that other stuff, like, is there a better way to do that? And so I'm a little apprehensive because, again, the last couple of years since really Big Sur moving forward, Apple has kind of not done a great job with some of that on the Mac. But Apple's perfect user is one who moves fluidly between their devices throughout a day, and making that easier is in the company's best interest. And probably ultimately, once you get over the hump, is better for users. And so I am excited about this, a little nervous, but mostly excited. And I think that it could be fun to see what Apple would do with this if Vision OS is the seed. But I will tell you, more than one of our friends who develop apps have texted me, be like, oh boy, because it means a lot of work for app developers.
Busy summer. Some final questions.
Okay.
That I want to share. Just sort of leave out there before we move on. It'll be interesting to see whether or not this redesign will totally and completely embrace Swift UI or still remain anchored to UIKit for several aspects. It'll be interesting to see if Apple also embraces the style of design that we saw with Photos last year. Not just like the actual structure of Photos, but like this idea of customizable app interfaces, right? Is Photos like quite telling from that perspective? And lastly, more of a wild card theory than a question.
Yes.
But can you imagine if this report actually means that Apple is going to unify everything under like an Apple OS brand instead of like, iOS, iPadOS, watchOS, tvOS, visionOS, like just say Apple OS. And it's, it's consistent. I'll give you that. It's consistent, but still optimized for everything. I know that there's a whole bunch of reasons why Apple doesn't want to do it.
Yeah.
But I think it's going to be fascinating to think about as an option.
I think Mike floated out an upgrade like 8 years ago.
Yeah.
I mean, Apple has a lot of operating systems, but really they have basically two. They have Mac OS and they have all the others that are basically the same underneath, but have different frameworks, different UIs, different capabilities. I don't think they would toss all of the brand equity they have in things like Mac OS and iOS in particular. But what I could see and what I would prefer is that they use this as an opportunity to keep the OSs named what they are, but tidy up the branding that links them. It's like, why are we on Mac OS Sequoia and iOS 18 and Vision OS 2? And some people like, just put a name after it or put a number after it, put a year after it. I actually would kind of like for them to use names. Like if it's Mac OS Sequoia, then like let it be iOS Sequoia or, just something so it's easier to understand and to keep up with. I get Apple like starting at 1 and moving forward. We saw it 2 weeks ago with the C1, right? The first cellular chip is C1. That's fine. I think with hardware, it's a little bit different and maybe more important in hardware. But while you're in there, Apple, do something about the names because it's getting out of hand.
I love that idea. And I'm going to give you one final what if scenario that I think you're going to particularly like, Stephen.
Okay.
If you are doing this and you're keeping the names separate, but you're giving them consistent branding.
Mm-hmm.
So we've had cats before, right?
Yeah.
On the Mac.
Yeah.
And then we've had California places. But now we're looking into the future. We're looking into, futuristic technologies, and we're looking ahead. We're looking to expand our
Oh,
horizons.
I see where you're
And
going.
and what better way to look up and above than space?
Space
Can you
names.
imagine iOS Andromeda and macOS Andromeda, or I don't know, tvOS Orion and visionOS Orion? Like
iPad
I
OS Uranus, you know? I mean, it's right there.
Yes. Or they could just say, iOS Pluto. That's not a planet.
It used to be an operating system, but now it's not.
I don't know. I just think, cats, California, space.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. I suspect that we will hear much more about this between now and WWDC, which really, Federico, not that far away. It's what, 2.5 months?
Only 2.5 months?
Is that
Are
right?
you serious?
April, May.
God.
Yeah, 2.5 months. Oh, 2 months.
Oof.
2.5 to 3 months.
Okay, yeah, it's next week.
It's tomorrow.
It's tomorrow.
I do think we'll get dates in the next 2 weeks. We're entering that phase.
It's looking, not to take a political turn, but it's looking increasingly how can I say this? Challenging to consider a trip to the United States if you're not American.
Yeah.
These days, you know.
I get it. I get it.
I'm just gonna say it. People are gonna hate me for it. Do WWDC in London. Do it in Europe. It's right there. But the area around Battersea is beautiful. Just do it there.
Do it.
Everybody's gonna be safe.
WWD Battersea. It's right there.
That was bad even for your standards.
This episode of Connected is brought to you by Google Gemini. Gemini Live is the feature where you can just talk to it, and it's really wild to have a full-on conversation with this thing. I was messing around and asked it to give me some ideas for hosting an event, and when it starts giving results, you can just stop it and say, okay, well, what about something low-key for a smaller group? And then it adjusts to that, and you can keep going until you get an idea that you want. And I think it's really useful for brainstorming things. It's good when you don't know where to start, or if you hit a wall, you can just open Gemini and it helps you get the ball rolling. But you can use it for all kinds of stuff. If you want to learn something new, or have it give you advice or explain Bitcoin in simple terms, which seems impossible, but it can do it. Or you can have it quiz you on something like microbiology. I mean, imagine being a student and you've got a personal tutor on hand. It's hard to explain. You really just need to play around with it, see how it listens, responds, and adapts to your style of conversation. Just try it out. It's free. Our thanks to Google Gemini for their support of the show and all of Relay. I've had this thought rattling around in my head the last couple weeks.
Yes, buy it.
No, I'm not buying a Mac Studio. Did Apple accidentally make the world's best AI desktop?
Yes, I think they accidentally realized, I'm half joking, but also not really, that they're making the best AI computers.
Yeah. I don't think that was the goal when they started, sketching out Apple Silicon for the Mac probably 8 years ago now, because we're 5 years into it. So 10 years ago. But they kind of fell into it, I think. Now, I think they've embraced it since then, right? Like, they're not continuing to be surprised by it. But this has come to light, especially with the Mac Studio and the M3 Ultra. Y'all have been writing about this on Mac Stories. So what's the deal here?
The deal is that benchmarks came out for the new Mac Studio with the M3 Ultra, and it looks like a beast of a machine. I especially want to point people to these review/benchmarks by Max Weinbach at Creative Strategies. They have done an excellent job comparing the performance of the new M3 Ultra Mac Studio running on-device local large language models. So the models downloaded and running locally on the computer between the Mac Studio and a PC setup using the latest Intel desktop high-end CPUs and the NVIDIA RTX 5090. So currently the best GPU in the world for consumers.
That is very expensive.
It's a very expensive GPU and a very expensive setup all around.
Mm-hmm.
And the most surprising aspect to me is that in a vanilla setup, meaning you're just downloading the model and you're running the model with a non-optimized, not to get too much into the weeds, there's plenty of ways for like programmers and developers to optimize a large language model for an NVIDIA GPU. But if you just, set it up and you run it vanilla out of the box, the M3 Ultra absolutely obliterates the 5090, and to the point where in this story, I wanted to look up the specs again. They're using the 256 gigabyte version of the Mac Studio with the Ultra, so they're actually not even using the top of the line version, but with these specs, and they have the 32 core CPU, the 80 core GPU, they have that unified memory, 192 gigabytes of those 256 can be allocated to VRAM. They have a 4 terabyte SSD. And if you just look at the numbers, if you scroll down in the story that is going to be linked in the show notes, and if you scroll to the LLM performance table, you're going to see that, for example, this person is running one of the Qwen models. So Qwen is the large language model created by Alibaba. That's going to be, according to the reports, one of the partners for Apple Intelligence in China. They're running the 32 billion 4-bit version of Qwen. The RTX 5090 can output almost 16 tokens per second. I know that tokens are not necessarily words, but for the sake of simplicity and clarity on this episode, think of like 16 instances of the word hello. Like the word hello tends to be a single token.
Hello.
So imagine that hello. Imagine
hello.
Hello. Imagine that every second, that large language model on a 5090 can spit out 16 hellos.
Hello.
The hello, like really fast. It's very eager to say hello. But the Ultra in the Mac Studio can spit out 33 per second of them. And that's basically like twice the performance that you're getting in a computer that is a chunky Mac Mini, essentially. So yeah, I do think that, and the story goes on to like to sort of explain how a lot of the work here is being done by the open source framework that Apple created for developers, which is called MLX. It's an open source framework that allows developers to fine tune large language models specifically for Apple Silicon and specifically for the unified memory architecture of Apple Silicon. And so when you combine those gains and those optimizations with models that are and you just want to run them out of the box, you get significant better performance on a Mac Studio compared to a 5090, which basically leads into this bigger topic of, is Apple making the best AI computers for consumers and just tinkerers right now? Potentially, yes.
Potentially, yes. There are a couple of things here that are interesting to me, and reading through this, and I read through the Apple open source MLX stuff, and I couldn't help but think about things like OpenCL, which back in like 2013 with the Trashcan Mac Pro, Apple was like, OpenCL, like, this is how we're going to compute on GPUs. And it just didn't really take off. I mean, it did in some circles, but not hugely. Think about Metal for graphics, right? Apple's graphics frameworks that, by all intents and purposes, seem to be very good and very performant. Apple's basically having to like twist the arms of video game companies to port their games to use Metal, right? But here, there are a couple distinct differences. One, because all of these researchers and all of this work happens in the open, Apple's been forced to publish these things in a way that they probably didn't do with OpenCL and probably haven't done with Metal. And even if there is a hill to climb to adopt Apple's frameworks, the hardware is so compelling that people will do it, right? With Metal, yeah, like you can really like make your game sing on an iPhone, but there the market factor is there's a bunch of iPhones and people with iPhones spend money on apps. But here, if you can make your model really sing on Mac hardware using Apple's open source frameworks, you could be saving significantly in terms of budget when you're putting these things together. And, the 5090 is an interesting card because it can do AI stuff, but it's also marketed to consumers for gaming. But when you get into like NVIDIA's AI specific hardware that like these AI companies are buying and putting in like big racks in data centers,
Yeah.
it's a different ballgame in terms of price. And you can't just get some of that stuff. You've got to have contracts and you got to have minimum buys and there's waiting times. And you can just order a pretty nice Mac Studio on your phone and get it on your doorstep in, 10 days. That's amazing. And I think,
I mean, for context, an NVIDIA H100, which is the NVIDIA tensor based GPU that is used in data centers, that is usually it goes for about $30,000. So that gives you some context.
That's a lot of Mac Studios.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just think it's so interesting. And they talked about this on Upgrade this week as well. Jason had John Gruber on, and they were talking about this. And I think there's kind of two levels to the conversation. There's like the framework model sort of level that we've been at. But then there's the conversation of, well, if Apple wants to like continue to entice these companies, is Apple Intelligence a stumbling block for that? Like, should Apple take all of this and turn the Mac into not only the best AI computer for researchers and developers, but the best AI computer for consumers? That I think is a very different conversation, and one that I'm just not sure where that lands. I don't think, look, if you're serious about AI, you're just going to ignore Apple Intelligence and like download these models on your Mac or like run the ChatGPT app like a lot of us do, or you're going to find ways to make it work for you. I don't think this means that Apple's like Apple Intelligence efforts are suddenly going to evaporate. Now, to be clear, they haven't been great yet, and they're behind, and they're going to fall more behind with the Siri stuff, it seems like. So I don't know. Like, do you view those as like two different things? What are your thoughts there?
I think I keep coming back to this idea that if Apple is falling behind, and by falling behind we mean they don't have a comparable suites of services when it comes to AI that they can offer to users and to developers. If that's the case, I think one potential avenue for them to sort of get out of this problem would be sort of this twofold approach of, well, we're going to make the best possible hardware that consumers can buy and developers can buy, right? And anecdotally speaking, it does seem to me like everybody who's really into AI in terms of like, heavy users of AI products or developers of AI software, like everybody's just using a Mac these days. So that's the hardware route, like to just say, we're going to make the best possible hardware. And sure, maybe NVIDIA, capture the market in data centers, but we're going to capture the market at home. We're going to make sure that the developers who may be using, expensive data centers, when it comes to their desks, they all have Macs. And I would wager that 90% of OpenAI employees and engineers, they're all using MacBook Pros or desktop Macs. Like that's sort of the scenario that I think Apple would be more than happy to be in. Like, but at the same time, and I had an article on Mac Stories about this morning. When it comes to software, I think there's one way to mitigate this narrative right now and this problem right now would be for Apple to say, well, so everybody's building AI powered apps and software features these days. And we, as Apple and with Apple Intelligence, we are being completely left out of the conversation because all of these developers are building against APIs from Google, from OpenAI, from Anthropic, from DeepSeek, and they're not using any of our. They're using our developer tools to build and run the apps, but they're not using our APIs. And all of this user data and all of these APIs are not going to us; they're going to somebody else.
Yeah.
And I think if you're Apple, and this is the article that I posted, like there is an interesting thought of Apple saying, well, but what if we sort of regain control of that developer angle and instead offered Apple Intelligence as sort of like a middleman, as an intermediary between developers and those third-party AI tools. So I had this article where I imagined like, what would an Apple Intelligence SDK as a bridge to ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini? What would it look like? And why should Apple do it? And I think it is interesting to think about, Apple in this way, Apple saying, well, instead of bringing your own API key for ChatGPT, you can just keep working with the Apple SDK. You can keep working. We're going to give you APIs that sort of normalize the usage of Claude or ChatGPT. That are going to be integrated. They're going to be available in UIKit. They're all going to be available in Swift UI, in Swift, in all the languages that we support. They're going to be supported in all of our frameworks. You can build for Apple platforms. They're going to work everywhere. You don't need to bring your own API key for a third-party provider. You can just be a member of the Apple Developer Program, and we're going to give you, some API calls for free on a monthly basis. Otherwise, we're going to sell you a subscription. And that subscription for additional AI integrations, again, we're going to act as the middleman. We're going to act as an aggregator of sorts. Those subscriptions are going to be more affordable than if you just go as an individual, as an indie developer, or as a small company, if you sign up for the standard business or enterprise plans from OpenAI, Anthropic, Google, and so forth. So a potential idea would be for Apple to say, we already have the control of the hardware because everybody's just using Macs these days. But while we're building our own large language model, we may sort of regain control of the software aspect by saying, you can build with Apple Intelligence, you can use those third-party APIs, but you're going to go through us. And it's going to be better for you because it's going to be cheaper, and you're going to get a privacy guarantee from Apple. That's something I keep thinking about, big picture right now.
Exciting times.
Well,
for the Mac, what a time.
For the Mac, like, what did Gruber call it on their Inferable? Like a happy accident.
Yeah.
And I think it is. And I don't know if Apple is actually gonna say, you know what, instead of rolling your own integration with ChatGPT, use the Apple Intelligence SDK. But I'll give you this much: they themselves are doing it for Siri. They're falling back to ChatGPT and Google to an extent to sort of supplement the functionalities that by themselves alone they cannot offer. So if Apple does it for themselves, is there a scenario in which they can do it for others? And I think there is.
Oh, I think that does it. We've come to the end, Federico.
I think we did it. Lots of topics.
Yeah. It's been a very busy March. So, some years March is kind of quiet. Not this year.
Not this year.
Not this year. If you want to read more about the topics we spoke about or get yourself a sweet Connected shirt before they're gone, go to relay.fm/connected/543 for the show notes. Those notes are also in your podcast player. Let's go find them. You can leave feedback at connectedfeedback.com. We love to hear from our listeners. And you can join to get longer ad-free versions of the show that we do each and every week at getconnectedpro.co. If you want more of Federico, he is the editor-in-chief of MacStories.net. And looking forward to your column I'm sure we'll talk about that next week. Mike is not here. Mike is on paternity leave. So keep the Hurley family, maybe just write Mike's name out and put it on your desk and in memory of him. That got weird. I didn't know where I was going when I started it, and that's where I ended.
keep thinking of Mike.
Keep thinking of Mike.
Keep him in your thoughts. He's out there raising a baby, sometimes thinking about Apple and technology,
putting Y's in words that don't have Y's in them.
Like Mike, for example.
Like Mike. Yeah. You can find me at 512pixels.net, and I co-host Mac Power Users here on Relay. Comes out each and every Sunday. I'd like to thank our sponsors, Ecamm, NetSuite, and Google Gemini. And until next week, Federico, say goodbye.
Arrivederci.
Bye, y'all.